rise Jenny and Sumit as husband and wife.
The zipper sound was soft, almost too soft for what it meant. Jenny didn't slam a door. She didn't scream. She didn't break down sobbing the way viewers of 90 Day Fiancé had seen her do for almost a decade. She just zipped. A simple, final motion. That suitcase wasn't packed overnight. It had been packed over 10 exhausting years, piece by piece. Every rejection, every insult, every time she told herself to hold on a little longer, had folded itself neatly into that luggage. And this time, Jenny didn't cry to stop the goodbye. She wasn't threatening to leave. She had already left inside her mind weeks ago. Everything about that morning felt intentional. Her silence wasn't passive. It was powered by something heavier. The weight of knowing this wasn't an argument she could win, or wanted to. She sat in the same living room where she once believed love alone would be enough, her hand brushing the same ugly throw pillow she used to cry into, and realized none of it meant safety. The walls weren't keeping her protected, they were keeping her trapped. Sumit was in the shower. It's possible he still believed today was just another tension-filled morning, maybe leading into a reconciliation. But Jenny wasn't waiting on one more apology. She'd had every version of that already. When she reached for that necklace, the one Sumit gave her years ago when they got secretly married behind his parents' backs, her hands shook, but her mind didn't. She held it not like a reminder of what they shared, but like a symbol of how many times she compromised pieces of herself to stay. Wearing it wouldn't change anything anymore. Packing it felt like collecting the last part of a woman who deserved better than being a guest in her own relationship. Sumit always thought Jenny's crying meant she was still in it, still fighting, still hoping. And in the past, he was right. But not today. Because today, she was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that builds, not after a storm ends, but after a soul gives up yelling into one. But what Jenny did next changed the entire tone of their ending, and even Sumit didn't see it coming. She sat the suitcase down right in the middle of the bed, fully packed, fully closed, waiting, visible. Not to provoke, not to threaten, but because she didn't plan to pick it back up. Sumit would either understand or he'd fall apart. Jenny had prepared for both. And without a word, she walked out into the living room, sat with her tea untouched, and waited for the only man she'd ever loved to discover she'd stop loving this version of her life. There were no explosions in Jenny's story. No dramatic betrayals, no secret cheating scandals. What tore her apart was quieter than that. It was in the way people didn't look at her when she entered the room. It was in the way Sumit's relatives spoke about her, as if she wasn't even sitting there, as if pretending she didn't exist could erase her. Their disdain was all surface smiles and sharpened silences. Tradition was the excuse, but rejection was the reality. And slowly, without anyone needing to raise their voice, Jenny began to disappear. 10 years. That's how long she stayed. Not for adventure, not for obsession, not for some vacation fantasy, but for love. For the real kind. The kind that makes you leave behind grandchildren, friends, and a familiar language, just to start over with someone you believed in. But no matter how many saris she wore, no matter how politely she smiled at family gatherings, she never stopped being the foreigner, the older woman, the problem. Every dinner with his family felt like a test. Every question had a trap. Was she happy? Too honest, and they called her ungrateful. Too polite, and they said she was faking it. They never asked how she was adjusting. They only asked when she was leaving. And Sumit? He never wanted to hurt her. That's the hardest part. He loved her, yes. He defended her, sometimes. But over and over again, he allowed that love to live on mute. Behind closed doors, he comforted her. In public, he shrank. And soft love in private means very little when the pain keeps happening in daylight. She recognized it most clearly in her reflection. Over the years, the woman she used to be, confident, curious, fiery, became someone skilled at walking on eggshells. She'd glance at Sumit before speaking, trying to calculate if what she was about to say might make things harder for him. Not for her, for him. She didn't want to be the reason they argued, or worse, the reason they stopped trying. The photos framed on the walls, the ones showing her and Sumit on Indian holidays, laughing and adorned in color, even those started to feel like props. Pretty distractions from the reality that she was never actually invited into this life, only granted access through his permission. And every time his mom stormed out of a room, yelling about disgrace, every time someone commented on her age while pretending they were joking, and every time Sumit said, "I'm sorry, I know it's hard," she stuffed it all down. She didn't want to seem like the foreign woman who couldn't handle the culture. But this wasn't about culture. This was about being slowly erased in the name of pleasing everyone else. And yet, after everything she endured, the moment that broke her wasn't the loudest one. It was that final night when no one yelled, when no one stormed out, when nothing happened except her heart finally going quiet. It started the way it always did. Polite hellos, awkward tea, fake smiles, so forced they looked painful. But Jenny had learned to read the room. And this particular visit from Sumit's parents didn't smell like reconciliation. It smelled like setup. Again, the air wasn't loud, but it was thick. Sumit's mom sat stiffly across from Jenny, her fingers clenched around her scarf like she was physically holding herself back. She didn't have to shout. Her disgust was in her silence. Everyone knew what this was. Jenny tried to hold steady. She wasn't new to this performance. She said namaste. She smiled. She offered chai. She told herself to stay calm. Maybe they really do just want to talk. Maybe this'll be different. But the eyes across from her told a different story. Barely masked contempt. Everything Jenny had endured for years was about to come wrapped in passive-aggressive civility, and she knew the script. Then, without warning, came the strike. Sumit's mom, voice still smooth, accused her of destroying her son's future again. She said Jenny had stolen his youth, said she had shamed their family, that she didn't belong, that this entire thing was a mistake they never approved of, never accepted. Old lines, but this time they landed with more finality. Sumit said nothing. He looked down. He scratched his arm like he was uncomfortable but not incredulous. Like maybe part of him expected this. Maybe even understood it. The part Jenny couldn't unsee? He didn't interrupt. She felt her face flush, but not from embarrassment. This wasn't new enough to be shocking. It was old pain, unwrapped and recycled yet again. But what was different? She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She didn't crack a joke to de-escalate the tension. She went completely, terrifyingly still. This wasn't restraint. This was withdrawal. A subtle internal retreat. Jenny wasn't fighting anymore, because somewhere inside her, she had already left the ring. Later, she wouldn't remember exactly what sentence tipped it, or which insult finally switched something off. But she would remember the feeling, like a soft click inside her chest. A quiet resignation that wasn't sad or angry, just final. Sumit's dad didn't help. Quiet the whole time, glancing at his tea like the spoon held more importance than his son's emotional health. His silence didn't protect the peace. It cloaked the violence. Emotional abuse dressed in tradition. And once again, family honor was used like a weapon that couldn't be challenged because it was sacred. Sumit finally muttered something, a half-hearted defense that Jenny could barely even process. It wasn't loud. It wasn't firm. It was aimed vaguely in their direction but lacked any fuel. like he'd tossed a lifeline 10 feet too short. Almost like he needed them not to feel fully offended, even as his partner paid the price. After his parents left, Sumit turned to her, searching for reassurance. But Jenny was no longer there in the way he needed her to be. She was still sitting on the couch, hands resting on her knees, back straight. But her energy had vanished. She was present physically, yes, but the connection between her body and her spirit, that link had snapped clean. But while Jenny stood up inside, Sumit's world was quietly caving in. He noticed it right away. Her silence wasn't sad. It wasn't passive-aggressive. It wasn't temporary. It was vacant. Like the person he loved was now making calculations, not trying to repair anything. She didn't yell. She didn't beg him to stand up to them. She didn't ask him why he didn't say more. She said nothing. Emotionally, she was packing that suitcase already. Psychologists call it emotional detachment. But it doesn't happen overnight. Jenny had felt 1,000 cuts before this one. This wasn't an impulsive heartbreak. It was a burnout, the kind that builds slowly, quietly, until one day, there's no fire left. She had reached the point where even the pain was gone. That's how numb she felt. And if she'd let herself scream or cry, she would have let more of herself invest again. But those parts were already retracted. She wasn't trying to protect the relationship anymore. She was trying to protect Jenny. What's more haunting is that Sumit still didn't realize how far she'd drifted. Like most people in emotionally loaded relationships, he confused quiet with calm. But her silence wasn't peace. It was grief. And maybe, on some unconscious level, he knew that too. Because after his parents left and he walked around the apartment trying to talk it out, his words got faster. His explanations got shakier. He kept circling the same lines. I didn't know they would say that. I'm trying my best. You know how they are. Like saying it the 10th time would land differently. But Jenny didn't even argue anymore. And that's what broke him too. She gave him no pushback, no reaction to grip onto. Just soft nods and a pale expression that made one thing horribly clear. It was already too late. That ambush didn't just ruin an evening. It ended a chapter. Not because the cruelty that day was new, but because Jenny finally saw it wasn't going to stop. She didn't want to burn their relationship down. She just couldn't survive it any longer. And that is exactly when some of the most painful goodbyes begin. Not with screaming, not with drama, but with a long, echoing silence from a person who's finally finished begging to be treated like they belong. The kitchen was quiet. Too quiet for a home once filled with laughter, arguments, whispered futures. Jenny stood alone, her hands absent-mindedly folding the same scarf she'd worn on her first trip to India. It was faded now, the reds not so bright, the threads softer from countless washes. She held it for a moment longer than necessary, not because she loved it, but because it had seen every version of her. The hopeful tourist, the stubborn fighter, the heartbroken bride. She placed it into the open suitcase gently, but her eyes didn't move. They stayed fixed on the photo on the wall. Sumit and Jenny, dressed in cream and gold, garlanded with flowers, both smiling, both trying so hard to believe that love could drown out tradition. That wedding wasn't legal, not accepted, not celebrated. But in that moment, it was hers. The moment she thought she'd finally crossed over from guest to family. What a heavy illusion that turned out to be. She moved to the dresser next, picking up small things. A perfume bottle nearly empty. A hair clip she hadn't used in months. That awkward clay elephant he bought her on a street corner once, clutched in her hand during their first real fight. Back then, every makeup restored another thread. Now, she was unraveling for good. Earlier that morning, he handed her a cup of chai. Sweet, extra ginger, just how she liked it. He didn't say much, but the gesture spoke louder than he probably realized. If things were different, she would have thanked him, would have kissed him on the cheek. But the warmth in the mug only reminded her how cold everything else had become. Even the small comforts now felt like guilt traps. She remembered the early days, landing in India, stepping off the plane into a storm of unfamiliar languages, smells, traffic that felt like chaos made normal. She was scared, but she was also in love. That kind of love that makes you believe you're immune to loneliness. That love kept her standing during years filled with disapproval, discomfort, and public whispers. She ate the food. She learned the customs. She bent herself into shapes she wasn't made for. Not because she was trying to erase herself, but because she believed merging meant maturity. But blending in and being accepted weren't the same thing. Every outfit tailored to look more local became a soft reminder that no matter what she wore, she was still too American, too white, too old. Every time she went quiet to avoid conflict, she lost another inch of herself. And somehow, even after all this time, 10 years of sharing a bed, a life, a dream, that apartment still never felt like hers. It wasn't the space. It was the feeling. Like she had overstayed an invitation that was never truly warm to begin with. The pictures on the wall never included her side of the family. The storage was always temporary. Even the smell of the place, spices, incense, a hint of Sumit's cologne, it reminded her she was still adapting. Always adapting. But this quiet night was anything but calm. It was the eye in her emotional storm. She moved room by room, touching things for the last time, not out of sentiment, but out of habit. Her fingers trailed over the couch where they'd watched TV in silence after another fight with his parents. The bedside lamp that buzzed faintly at night, a sound she used to find irritating. Now, she just wanted to remember it clearly, because soon there'd be nothing left of this place but memory. They had fought so hard for each other. That part was real. The tears were real. The sacrifices. Sumit going against his family to marry her, it happened. He had battled them, in his way. But the truth Jenny couldn't ignore anymore was brutal. One person fighting while the other bleeds isn't love. It's survival. And she was tired of surviving in someone else's territory. The makeup conversations that followed each heartbreak felt shorter now. Less passionate. Less hopeful. Both of them were stretching a love that had nowhere to breathe. A love that deserved warmth, protection, celebration. Not tight ropes, loopholes, and constant damage control. She glanced at the clock. The night was almost over. She hadn't slept. Didn't plan to. She didn't want the numbness of rest. She wanted to feel the full weight of what she was doing. Because leaving without feeling seemed cruel. To both of them. Her clothes, once vibrant, now looked faded in her hands. Not because they were old, but because she couldn't see herself in them anymore. Each one was a reminder of who she had tried to become, not who she was. She folded them anyway, not with bitterness, not even with sadness, but with finality. The suitcase was almost full now, heavy with more than just fabric. It carried decisions, fears, anger, heartbreak, and courage. A different kind of heavy, the kind you feel in your chest when you breathe. In a corner of the wardrobe, something caught her eye. His sweater, the gray one with the torn sleeve he always reached for on lazy Sundays. She picked it up, hesitated, pressed it to her face. It smelled like him. She held it to her chest, then folded it and left it behind. She wouldn't rob him of everything. She was already taking the version of Jenny he knew. She sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed where they shared a decade. Where they carved out whispers of a normal life between emotional landmines. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the ache of certainty. This was happening, and without any words at all, she said goodbye to a life she built by force, but never fully belonged to. The door swung open a little too fast. Sumit dropped his keys louder than he meant to. The apartment was dim, untouched since morning, but something was off. The silence thundered. Then he saw it. Her suitcase, center of the room like a spotlight with no stage, fully zipped, upright. Final. His breath caught. He didn't need to ask. But he did. Softly. Jenny? She came out from the bedroom like someone who had already rehearsed this moment 100 times, not because she wanted to, but because there was no other way to survive it. Sumit stared at the bag, his smile faltering instantly, the blood drained from his face, his mouth struggling to form a sentence. What is this? But he knew. They both did. Jenny looked at him, eyes swollen, voice calm. This was not an emotional ultimatum. This wasn't her trying to win a fight. It was her protecting her soul. He stepped forward. You can't do this. His voice cracked, like each word was splitting open something inside him. Please, Jenny, don't leave. She couldn't meet his eyes yet. Not because she didn't care, but because if she did, she might fall apart. And she couldn't afford another collapse. Sumit, she said, her voice shaking, I can't stay here anymore. His entire body stiffened, like the words knocked the air straight out of him. But you love me, he said. You said you loved me, Jenny. We've come so far, been through so much. He was stammering now, drowning in disbelief. And when he said, but I love you, her answer stunned him more than any goodbye ever could. I know, but love isn't enough when I'm slowly disappearing inside it. He paused, confused, broken. What are you saying? He whispered. I'm saying I've spent years waiting for it to get better, waiting for your family to accept me, for the fights to stop, for the insults to end, for this house to feel like home. And it never happened. I've been waiting for someone to choose me, protect me, make me feel like I wasn't an outsider in my own life. But I did choose you, he argued. Jenny, I married you. You're my wife. I went against everything for you. Then why did I always feel like I had to earn it? Her voice sharpened, but not with anger, with clarity. Why did every moment feel like I was one insult away from being erased again? Sumit's desperation was turning frantic now. I thought we were stronger than this. I thought we were fighting together. No, she replied softly. I was fighting. You were balancing. He didn't know what to say. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then he collapsed onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. I didn't know it was killing you. I didn't see it like that. That's the problem, she said. No one did. No one ever sees the woman breaking when she stays too long. And for the first time, he heard something new in her voice. Not sadness, not guilt. Strength. A painful, earned kind of strength. The kind that comes when you finally stop listening to the world's favorite lie, that love means never giving up. That women who walk away are quitters. That silence is noble. That endurance is love. I stayed through things I wouldn't wish on anyone, she continued. I let people shame me, devalue me, judge me, and I smiled through it. I told myself it was culture. I excused every cut, every rejection. You loved me quietly, but your silence when they hurt me? That was louder. He tried to reach for her hand, and she let him. But her fingers didn't fold into his. They stayed still, polite, distant. I'll talk to them. I'll fix this, he promised suddenly. I'll defend you more, cut ties if I have to. I'll stop letting them break you. But it's already broken me, she replied. And it shouldn't take me leaving for you to realize that. He looked up, eyes red, searching for something to hold on to. An opening, a crack in her decision. He was grasping at air. Don't punish me for not being perfect. I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm not punishing you, she said. I'm choosing me. For the first time in years, that sentence hit harder than any insult ever had. Because she wasn't angry. She wasn't yelling. She was simply done. And the truth sat between them, impossible to avoid. He had spent years believing that staying was love, that surviving through pain was commitment. And she had finally learned the price of sacrificing herself for the appearance of a relationship. As he sobbed quietly, her hand hovered over his shoulder. She wanted to soothe him. But this wasn't a wound she caused. It was one he ignored, until it cost him everything. And with every second that passed in that dimly lit bedroom, Sumit realized, love, when not protected, loses its power to protect. And what had slipped through his fingers? Wasn't a woman giving up on him, but a woman who had already given everything. The car ride was silent, except for the occasional breath Jenny had to remind herself to take. Not because she forgot, but because the weight pressing on her chest made air feel optional. Sumit sat next to her, twisting his hands, staring out the window, blinking too fast for it to be from sunlight. Neither of them spoke. Words aren't built for this level of final. The driver didn't know. How could he? To him, it was just a couple heading to the international terminal, probably going on vacation or saying goodbye like normal people. But this wasn't normal. This was a funeral with no casket. Just memory, baggage, and breathless grief sitting between them like a wall they'd both hit too many times. Jenny glanced outside. The streets of Delhi blurred past. Buildings she'd passed for 10 years. Faces she couldn't name. Colors she used to find magical before they turned into daily reminders of how far from home she really was. Every mile closer to the airport brought her further from the life she'd tried to pretend could be hers. Sumit finally spoke. Low and broken. "You don't have to do this." Jenny turned her head, her face soft but unmoved. "I already did." The response gutted him. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true. They drove in silence a little longer. The kind of silence that holds tension and tenderness in equal weight. That silence where the only thing louder is the voice in your head screaming that this can't be real. He reached for her hand. She let him take it this time. Their fingers touched, but they didn't lock. And somehow, that was the most painful part. A gesture that used to mean safety now felt like a memory they were both struggling to hold without breaking it. And even in public, this goodbye was more intimate than most couples' marriages. When the car pulled up to the departure drop-off, everything got sharper. The honking taxis, the chaos of luggage-wheeling families, airport security waving people along, the sounds of the outside world moved at regular pace. But for them, time stopped. People were everywhere, yet they felt completely alone in the middle of it. No one around them knew they were watching the final scene of something once rare, now shattered. Sumit grabbed the suitcase from the trunk like it weighed more than it used to. Not with muscle, but with emotion. Jenny reached to help. He hesitated, not because he didn't want her to, but because this was the last thing they'd carry together. Inside the terminal, announcements boomed overhead. Gate changes, boarding updates, new connections. But nothing prepared Sumit for the internal reroute he was walking through. His vision was fogged, not from exhaustion, but from the tears he refused to let fall in public. For him, being strong meant holding them in. For Jenny, strength looked like releasing what needed to leave. She checked her documents at the gate counter. The woman behind the desk looked bored, almost annoyed. She had no idea she was stamping the end of something that had cost two people a decade of their lives. Jenny was calm, not because she didn't care, but because her emotions had been spent long before that morning. You don't cry at the finish line of a battle you barely survived. You just limp forward. Sumit hovered behind her, still hoping maybe she'd change her mind, that some miracle would happen before she stepped away. He wanted a sudden fix, a loophole, an option B. None came. She turned to him, airport lighting casting shadows under her tired eyes. She looked fragile, but firm. "This is the only way I survive what we became," He nodded. A single nod, like he understood and hated it at the same time. He wanted to say something else. Something powerful. Something that would rewind all of this. But all he could get out was, "Please, don't go." Jenny stepped closer. Inches from him now. Not touching, but close enough to feel his pain. "I love you. And I always will," she said. "But I can't keep sacrificing myself for a life where I never felt safe." Sumit's tears were silent this time, not shoved down, not swallowed. Dripping freely, staining his shirt. She placed her hand flat on his chest, over his heart, soaking in the last few seconds of warmth she knew she wouldn't feel again. "Take care of yourself. Don't let them make you smaller." That final line crushed him, because for the first time, she wasn't protecting him. She was letting him go on his own. Jenny turned, her feet slow, but steady. Sumit reached out as if motion could stop the moment. But she didn't stop. She didn't look back. She walked through security, past the point of return. A few people watched, not out of recognition, but curiosity. Maybe they sensed the weight of what had just happened. Maybe they'd whisper later about the crying man in the terminal. But none of them knew they had just witnessed the final goodbye of a relationship that once battled the world. Sumit collapsed onto a bench, shoulders trembling, eyes empty. Years of hope rewound in an instant. The fights he thought they'd survive. The nights she cried but stayed. The weddings, the promises, the late-night dinners that tasted like peace. All gone. He buried his face in his hands, shaking with the truth. She had loved him completely, and still had to leave to save herself. Outside those glass doors, life kept moving. Flights boarded, taxis picked up new travelers. Homelands were returned to, luggage rerouted. But inside that airport waiting area, a man who once whispered that love conquers, all was left behind with nothing but love. And no one left to give it to. Jenny didn't just leave a country. She left an identity she had been wearing like a second skin, one stitched together by compromise, silence, and hope stretched past its limits. The moment her plane lifted off, it wasn't about escape. It was about release of the weight, of the role, of constantly begging to be enough on someone else's terms. She stared out of the window, the city lights fading beneath the clouds, and didn't cry. Not because she didn't feel the grief, but because she finally understood, grief wasn't a sign of regret. It was the scar tissue of surviving too much and knowing it can't continue. In the days that followed, silence echoed both louder and lonelier for those she left behind. Sumit woke up to a bed that still smelled like her shampoo. The wardrobe had gaps where her clothes used to hang. Her coffee mug sat in the sink, untouched, still stained with the last morning she tried to start normally. That home wasn't broken now. It was hollow. But this was never just about two people who couldn't make it work. Jenny's departure wasn't some dramatic breakup over love lost. The love remained. It still tugged at her through every airport corridor, every empty hotel room, every moment she stopped mid-thought expecting Sumit to respond. What she left behind wasn't a person. It was a system that refused to see her. For years, she'd been in orbit around someone else's family rules, customs, fears, and reputation. She made herself smaller, softer, more agreeable. She tried harder than anyone should ever have to, just to be allowed to stay. And when she finally realized nothing she gave was ever going to be enough to change their opinion, she stopped giving. That wasn't quitting. That was self-rescue. The world loves to tell women to stick it out, to be patient, to compromise. That love means enduring discomfort. But endurance stops being noble when it eats you alive. And Jenny, after a decade of slow-motion erasure, chose to exist, unapologetically, even if it meant walking away from the only man she ever saw a future with. Back in India, Sumit wasn't the same man either. You could see it in his eyes. In stories that surfaced after filming Wrapped, friends mentioning he barely left the house, former cast members hinting he'd grown distant, unreachable. For the first time, he wasn't split between his mother's shame and Jenny's hurt. He was alone with himself. And that silence forced him to hear all the things he had been too scared to face when Jenny was there absorbing the damage. Would he reflect? Would he confront the weight of his own hesitation? The cost of always balancing instead of choosing? Did he finally understand that being neutral amid cruelty is complicity? With Jenny gone, his family didn't celebrate, because even they could feel it. They won the war, but lost humanity in the process. All their efforts to erase her only revealed the emptiness of their own rigidity. There was no triumphant reunion, no reabsorption of Sumit into a joyous family fold, just cold victory. And the mirror of what they demanded him to sacrifice now staring back at them. Jenny wasn't model perfect. She had flaws. She made mistakes. She stayed too long. She forgave too often. But she did it all in the name of love. And she walked away not because the love ended, but because she refused to disappear under it. That takes a level of courage the world rarely respects, until they watch someone survive it. In the flashbacks now, things that once seemed sweet carry a sting. Her smiling in traditional Indian clothes, now a symbol of blending in until she evaporated. Her defending Sumit in interviews, now framed as someone rationalizing her own pain. Her joyful moments, real, yes, but also fleeting flickers trapped between storms. And the question everyone keeps asking, what now? Where did Jenny go after that flight? Did she reunite with her daughters in California? Rebuild a quiet life surrounded by people who didn't make her beg for room at the table? Did peace find her? Or did the ghosts of what almost was show up in every silence? And what about Sumit? Who is he without a translator for his emotions? Without a woman willing to carry the emotional labor while he navigated family drama from behind her skirts? Did he grow? Has the absence rewritten how he sees marriage, loyalty, strength? These aren't simple answers. And they might not come with clean conclusions, because surviving this kind of breakup isn't about fast healing or fresh storylines. It's about reconstruction. About letting yourself be angry, sad, numb, and eventually, real again. What Jenny took back was more than her luggage. She reclaimed her voice, her peace, her ability to say, I matter, and believe it enough to walk through airport gates alone, without knowing if the next step would be joy or just pure survival. And what Sumit was left with was the shell of a story he let decay on his watch. But while Jenny flew away, someone else flew straight in. And what they reveal next might just flip this entire story.